We have a few people attending today who indicated that they are new to the FDP program and would like to learn more. The FDP Institute provides world-class training and education to financial professionals to meet the accelerating needs of digital transformation in the industry. Our registration is currently open for our October exam, and we invite you to learn more at www.fdpinstitute.org. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar as I turn it over to Dr. Hossein Kazemi, Senior Advisor for Kaya Association and the FDP Institute. Thank you for moderating our session with Tom today. Welcome, Hossein.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for another exciting webinar. And we are very happy and actually proud to have an FDP charter holder, Tom Pickle, CEO and founder of Soup, which is a platform that supports traders. It's financial advisory. And he's going to talk about basically his journey in developing a trading strategy using machine learning and in particular neural networks and deep learning. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Tom to hear his presentation. Tom?
Hello, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Tom Pickle, and I will be telling you about the neural network I created for trying to predict future stock movements. We will begin with a short introduction to artificial intelligence, the basics, and I'll tell a little about myself. Next, we will discuss neural networks from above. Following that, we will shortly focus on the trading process, mention some other important concepts, and then I will try to connect the dots with my network. As a side note, notice the progress bar and the current topic at the bottom of each slide. First, let's ask, why deal with artificial intelligence? The answer is because it's the future. We feel it even without understanding it. It has already started to affect many aspects of our lives, be it in natural language processing, object identification, personalization, and profiling, and much more. I think that having an understanding of this rich part of our lives is a great investment for the long run. It will allow us to understand what's happening around us and will perhaps position us better to grab opportunities. But what is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is any system capable of simulating human intelligence and thought processes. Machine learning is a collection of algorithms and tools that help machines understand patterns within data and use this underlying structure to perform reasoning about a given task, such as predicting stock price movements. Regarding deep learning, we can think of it as a branch of machine learning that's trained on large amounts of data and deals with many computational units working in tandem to perform predictions. This is when models get more complex, and you can say gentle due to their complexity. It's mostly about numbers. Computers work with a binary system, only ones and zeros, which represent electrical signals that are either on or off inside the CPU or RAM. AI models are based on numbers and work with numbers, whether the data is continuous or categorical. Data either comes as numeric measurements or converted to numbers before being fed into a model. We transform the data using math, we manipulate it with our models, we measure errors, and achieve our goals using numbers. We will touch on this subject soon. These models require knowledge in algebra, calculus, statistics and probability, and information theory. But while math is important, perhaps the hardest part in AI is being able to perceptualize and understand complex, abstract ideas, such as problems that require multidimensional thinking. This means being able to process and create the right model for more complex datasets. As you can imagine, the AI discipline is very wide and complex. Let's start with the basics. If you want to understand machine learning, you need to have knowledge in both math and programming. Python is considered to be one of the most popular programming languages for data science, as it has many existing code packages practitioners can easily use and embed in their code. Campus Gov.il is an excellent source for learning Python online. There are 2 Python courses that are available in both Hebrew and Arabic. Apologies to all the speakers of other languages. They have a beginners and advanced classes, which are sharp and to the point. I highly recommend it. When you learn, try to develop a project so you will implement what you learned, face problems, solve them, and embed. Learn the theory by reading the FDP curriculum. It's a wonderful set of books and papers that was created especially for people like us who come from finance. Dig deeper into neural networks by reading books such as Neural Networks from Scratch, Make Your Own Neural Network, or some other books in this field. Lastly, watch YouTube videos. They can really help with grasping complex ideas. About me, I studied law and business in Israel. I've been working with alternative investments for the past 10 years. I started as a financial advisor, performing asset valuations, financial models, and business plans, and then moved to alternative investment fund analysis, and doing that for almost 6 years. I analyzed various private equity, private debt, real estate, and infrastructure investment fund strategies. A little more than 2 years ago, I decided to quit my job and focus on learning and creating a neural network for trading stocks. It was an endeavor, but I wanted to learn. I'm a Kaya member since 2017 and an FDP member since 2021. I learned how to program in Python in 2019. During all this time, in order to enhance my software development skills, I created some projects that included the scraping of real estate classified ads and sharing some wisdom, creating data mining tools for machine learning models, and also a module for supplying free proxy servers. My most complex project is a feed-forward neural network for trying to guess the price moves of publicly traded equity, and this is what we will talk about today. I've created a blog and put there an introduction I made for neural networks as viewed by an investment professional. These days, I'm creating Soup, an early-stage startup that develops a platform for artificial intelligence-based investment advisory. As you can see, I come from finance and perhaps will be better able to explain this field to you. Let's start talking about neural networks. A neural network is a type of machine learning model. We use it to discover possible relationships between features, also called explanatory variables or data dimensions, and a target, also called a label or dependent variable. Features are characteristics of each observation we have. We gathered observations from the general populations of our subject and measured various characteristics for each observation. The target is the characteristic or outcome we are trying to predict. Machine learning models can be tasked with either a supervised learning task or an unsupervised learning task. Supervised learning means that we were able to get a data set with labeled data, which is a large set of observations with values for each feature, and the target, which is the true value of our desired characteristic as measured in the past. Unsupervised learning works with data that is unlabeled, has no known target, and the task is to try to find patterns or groups in the data without the need for human intervention. Let's use an example to show how we can use a machine learning model, or specifically a neural network, for real-world benefit. Say that we have a machine in a factory and we want to predict malfunction in advance in order to increase our uptime and efficiency. We measure some variables that we think may be related to the machine's operation, such as humidity, room temperature, hours since last maintenance, and others. These are our features. We also measure the outcome, whether the machine malfunctions or not, and this is our target. We take measurements for each feature in a fixed time interval and keep the results in a table. A machine learning model can take all this data and potentially tell us, given certain values for the features we measure, what the target should be. So in our example, if an engineer wants to find out whether the machine is about to break, or the probability of that happening, all he needs to do is to make a reading and feed the feature values into a trained model. So the engineer collects his observations and keeps them in the form of a table. Once we have enough observations, this will be the data set we will use to train a machine learning model. Machine learning is a powerful way to learn nonlinear relationships. A nonlinear relationship is a mathematical relationship between two variables where the change in one variable does not produce a proportional change in the other variable. In other words, the relationship does not follow a straight line on a graph. One common example of a nonlinear relationship is the relationship between speed and time taken to travel a certain distance for an object undergoing acceleration. The goal in using machine learning for a supervised learning task is generalization. the ability to deduct a new target value given a set of new, previously unseen feature values. Now let's turn to briefly speak about the components of a neural network. The basic building block of a neural network is the neuron. A neuron is a group of calculations involving inputs, weights, a bias, and an activation function. We feed data into a neuron as a set of feature values or a vector of values. Each value is multiplied by a weight, and these multiplications are then added up into a single sum. We then add a bias value to this sum and pass the result through an activation function. The activation function's output is our neuron's single output value. Weights and biases are a neural network model's parameters. Each neuron in our network has a set of weights and a bias. The actual learning process is the slight and gradual tweaking of these parameters over multiple training cycles. Generally, a weight can be viewed as the strength of a signal into a neuron, where a larger value in absolute terms is more influential on the neuron's output. A negative value indicates an inhibitory relationship between the input and the output. The bias, another parameter, gives our model more flexibility and enables it to adjust a neuron's output independently of the inputs. It can be thought of as the intercept term in a linear equation. Activation functions add the nonlinearity capabilities to the neural network. Without the nonlinear activation functions, a network will only be able to learn linear relationships. There are many kinds of activation functions, but they all work the same way. They receive a neuron's initial output after multiplying input values with weights and adding the bias to the result, perform a nonlinear transformation on it, and then prepare to output it to the next layer. We choose an activation function based on the task and network architecture. To the right, we can see the sigmoid activation function and its first derivative. We can see that for each x we insert, we receive a y according to our function's format. Here we see a table containing 9 popular activation functions, their forward step structure and first derivative structure used for the backward step in the backpropagation process, which we will touch soon. It also includes the expected range of our forward step result and the recommended weight initialization technique we should use for each activation function as a rule of thumb. A weight initialization technique is the way we set the initial values for the network's weights before training. We should choose it to fit best with the network's activation functions, architecture, and task. Some available options are shown in this table. A layer is a set of neurons, as visible in the figure to the right. Each layer has at least one neuron. A layer is called hidden when it is situated between the input and output layers of a neural network. It is called hidden because its inputs and outputs don't have any special meaning when viewed from outside the network. Since a layer's output is the result of calculations performed on its input, its shape is dependent on the number of inputs and the number of layer neurons where calculations are made. The result is a matrix. In a fully connected neural network, each layer's output is the next layer's input. Each layer received an input matrix, performs calculations, and outputs it to the next layer. This is the general description of a forward step. A forward step into the network involving sending an input matrix of feature values, multiplying it with a weight matrix, and adding a bias vector. Remember that each neuron has a set of weights, one for each input feature, and a single bias. It looks like this. The input matrix has input observation counts as rows and feature counts as columns with feature values in each cell. A layer's weight matrix has features counts as rows and neuron counts as columns with the relevant weight in each cell. These are the two top here. A layer's bias matrix is actually a vector representing a row of biases, one for each neuron in the layer. The result of this action is also a matrix where the number of input items to the layer sets the number of rows, and the number of neurons in the layer sets the number of columns. This process continues until we reach the output layer. In Python, we use the numpy package's dot function for matrix multiplication, which results in a matrix. But what is a feed-forward neural network? It is a neural network where information flows in one direction from the input layer to the output layer without any cycles or feedback connections. We start with an input layer, in green here, which as we saw is a matrix of feature values. We move forward into the hidden layers, where calculations are made, the blue layer in this figure. There may be more than one hidden layer. Lastly, we reach the output layer, which is the output of our network. It can be anything from a single node to multiple nodes, depending on the tasks. Now let's pause and take a macro look. Thus far, we spoke about machine learning in general and how and why we should at least be familiar with this field. We learned that we begin by collecting data that describes something in the real world and then feed it into a neural network. The data is then manipulated in the neuron, and multiple neurons form a layer. Multiple layers form a network. We also learned about the model's parameters, the weights and the biases, the activation functions, and also about the input, hidden, and output layers. After having a basic understanding of neural networks, let's quickly discuss the bias-variance trade-off. This fundamental concept in machine learning represents the trade-off between two types of errors a model can make: bias error and variance error. The bias error basically measures our model's ability to approximate the true relationships in the population. The variance error measures the sensitivity of our model to small fluctuations or noise in the training dataset. The bias-variance trade-off arises because reducing one type of error often leads to an increase in the other type, and this is why it's a trade-off. One comes at the price of another, yet in different rates of change, and therefore there is a sweet spot to aspire to. Finding the right level of complexity in a model is essential to avoiding both underfitting, which means a high bias level, and overfitting, which means a high variance level. We seek to achieve good generalization performance on unseen data, and there lies the need for a balance. An underfit model is not flexible enough and misses important relationships. An overfit model is really good at learning the idiosyncratic nature of the training dataset, but will be unable to generalize to unseen data. We can see how these terms combine in the chart seen here. Now we'll discuss the training process. This is the mechanism that sits behind the network's learning. What we do is we feed some training data into the model, let it predict, measure the training error, optimize the model's parameters, and send in more data. This iterative process is called an epoch, which is a training iteration. When an epoch ends, we validate the model with our validation dataset and measure validation error. We will discuss this concept soon. When our model stops learning, we stop our process and then send in our test dataset to measure the test error. This is what's important to us, to minimize the test error, which is the error we get when we try to predict using featured data the model had not trained on. A low test loss means a good balance between the bias and variance errors. Let's discuss how we prepare the dataset for entering the neural network. We first create a dataset by collecting observations from the population through taking measurements. We then need to deal with missing data, which can be an error in measurement or some other reason why some features have no value. We should put thought into this. Do we complete missing data, or do we remove the entire observation from our dataset? We then transform each feature, represented as a column of values in our input dataset. For example, we can choose to perform standardization or z-score normalization to our data so that the learning process will not be tainted by the different column scales. After standardizing our data, all feature values have a zero mean and a standard deviation of 1. We do it separately for each feature column. Then we randomize the dataset to increase learning efficacy. We want the model to learn the relationships between the features and the target, regardless of their sampling order. Then we create a test dataset. We take 1 to 20% of the initial standardized dataset, depending on its size, and store it separately. This dataset should not be mixed in the learning process in any way. We need to prevent data leaks from happening, meaning the model must not get any idea of what's in the test dataset, or else it will have prior knowledge of it, and the test scores will tell us nothing about the model's true ability to generalize. Finally, we take another 1 to 20% from the initial dataset and use it for model validation, which is a local testing to tell us how well the model is learning along the way. We basically compare training and validation loss and stop training when the model starts to overfit the training dataset and validation loss starts to get higher than the training loss. Let's see how we create the model. We first decide upon the model's architecture and parameters, which set its basic building blocks. For example, the number of layers, the number of neurons in each layer's activation function, the weight initialization method, the type of optimizer to use, the starting learning rate, among others. Hyperparameters differ from just parameters in that the hyper are related to the architecture and building of the model, while just parameters is used as a general name for our model's weights and biases. Our decisions about hyperparameters should be based on logic and fit our task, but we will change the hyperparameters between training sessions as we try and see what we get. Let's dig a little deeper into the training process before moving on to talk about my network. The training process is a cycle of forward and backward steps. We'll use this depiction of a neural network to explain how training occurs. Basically, the training process is done in the following way. First, we make a forward step. We take a small group of observations from our training dataset and send it into the network. We can imagine every circle in the input layer to be an observation, a vector of feature values. Remember that we do not send in the target. We let the data flow through the hidden layers using matrix multiplication for weights and addition for biases, and pass the results through the activation functions. We can have anywhere from 1 to dozens hidden layers. The more hidden layers we have, the more intricate and fragile the model gets, but the more it is able to spot subtle patterns. Keep in mind the problems with making a model too flexible, which translates to a high variance error and to overfitting the training dataset. Once the manipulated data reaches the output layer, we measure the loss, which can be calculated as the average distance between the network's target's prediction and the true value for each observation, which we know because we used an existing training sample. The most used loss function for regression tasks is called mean squared error, or MSE. We can see it on the slide with y being the true target value for a single observation, and the f hat of x being the model's prediction for that observation that, as we remember, is represented by a vector of feature values. We can use other cost functions as necessary. Please notice that in this image, we have one output node that represents a regression task for when we try to guess continuous output value, such as the return of a stock. For a classification task, when we try to divide input observations into groups, such as cats and dogs, we will have more than one output node. Remember that we can use the terms cost, error, and loss interchangeably. After making a forward step and measuring the loss, we go back in the network, advancing through the layers from last to first, and while doing so, we tweak the model's parameter a little bit in such a way that helps minimize the loss function. This is called backpropagation, and it is done using an optimizer algorithm. Backpropagation involves computing the gradients of the loss function with respect to all the weights and biases of the network using the chain rule of calculus. The chain rule of calculus enables us to break the composite function that defines a neural network into its constituents and further calculate the partial derivative of each parameter with regards to the cost function. This creates a chain of gradients connected by multiplication to describe how a single parameter change influences the cost function. The gradients capture how much each weight or bias contributes to the overall error of the network. Once the gradients are computed, an optimization algorithm, such as stochastic gradient descent or one of its variants, is used to update the weights and biases of the network. By the way, it is called stochastic due to the use of randomly selected mini-batches of observations from our training dataset. We do not pass the entire training dataset in one go, and this translates to better learning. The magnitude of the weight update is determined by the learning rate, which is another hyperparameter. The learning rate controls the step size in the tweaking of the gradients. The goal is to iteratively update the parameters in a way that minimizes the loss function. What does it mean to minimize the loss function? This is a very simplified depiction of the cost function based on a single weight value. We can see that the network's cost or loss is a function of its parameters. Some parameter values can bring to minimal loss and some bring to higher loss. Generally, we are using an optimizer to slightly change the weights and the biases every time we make a backward step and then measure the cost in the next step with the next mini batch of training observation. If this x-axis represents our network's parameters, we change them slightly every run in order to reach the global minimum, not just the local one, which is suboptimal. Our optimizer has various hyperparameters to help it bounce around in a healthier way, trying to avoid local minima as much as possible. Accuracy is another measure of a machine learning's model efficacy. Depending on the task at hand, it is calculated as the percent of correct predictions out of total predictions made. In regression tasks, we can use a region around a specific point which is considered correct. In classification tasks, it's easier. We either got the class right or wrong. Both loss and accuracy serve as measures for how well a model was able to learn. Intuitively, the accuracy quickly tells us how good our model does what it was trained to do. It is important to remember that we train on minimizing validation loss while we use the accuracy as a secondary indicator for actual real-life success. It is also important to remember that this type of accuracy is only good for use if our dataset is balanced and our target is relatively common. For classification tasks, we have more types of accuracy available to us, such as precision, recall, the F1, and rock and leaf curves, which all come to help us measure the efficacy of classifying models better. Generally, we will prefer to use models that show the highest test accuracy measurements, assuming our sample adequately represents the general population. Once we finished training our model and spotted the best performing architecture and hyperparameter mix, we can start using our model. How do we use a model? Well, we save its parameters and hyperparameters into a file and load them when we need to. Once loaded, we recreate the network objects using these settings and input a single observation's feature values. Then we get a projected output. This is the network's prediction, and it's based on the feature values we gave it. It's also based on its hyperparameters and parameters, which express the optimal learning or the successful minimization of the cost function. Let's quickly go over some other concepts that are important for neural networks. First, grid search. Grid search is the iterative process of training, measuring results, logging our results, changing some hyperparameters, and then training again. The idea is to let the network run and train itself, and when it finishes, to change some hyperparameters and train again. This is an automatic process that allows us to cover many architectures in one go. After a while, if we found a model that we are happy with, as it has the best results with the test dataset, we can go ahead and use it in real life. Let's briefly discuss regularization. Regularization describes the actions we can take in order to control our model's complexity by diminishing or removing features from our training in order to make the training more efficient and disregard noise. The first method is called feature shrinkage, and the other, feature reduction. They both let the model train on all the input features while slowly reducing the importance to reducing the parameters of what appears to be unimportant features. Basically, the two methods add an additional penalty to the cost function we are trying to minimize. They each has its own strengths and weaknesses, so why not use both and enjoy the best of both worlds? This is where elastic net comes in, which is basically the two regularization techniques combined to influence our cost function together. Remember that one of our goals in training is to prevent overfitting and thus increase a model's ability to generalize. Most of the time, we don't know in advance which features are important to our target and which are just noise. Since the basic rule is that simple models are generally preferable over complex ones, we can use regularization techniques such as elastic net to decrease our model's complexity when it doesn't add to predicting our target. Dropout. Dropout is another form of regularization, as it helps us reduce the complexity and overfitting in our neural network. Dropout is basically done by adding a dropout layer after every hidden layer in our network, taking in the output of the layer's neurons, activation functions, and randomly assigning zeros to some of them. This output, which essentially disables some neurons, is fed into the next layer as input. This causes the network to not fixate on the few dominant features and spreads the training over more parameters. This way, the network will not focus on the few ones it thinks are the most influential on the target. Dropout is built into the network's architecture, and the dropout rate is a hyperparameter, meaning what percentage of neurons in each layer we turn off. We do not apply dropout when testing or when using our network. It's important to mention that there are various other regularization techniques, such as early stopping and batch normalization. Generally, different regularization types should not be used together in the same model, since they can interfere with each other. K-fold cross-validation. This is a training method we can use to be more confident of our results as we make a better use of our training dataset. This provides a more reliable estimate of a model's performance by evaluating it on multiple subsets of data. What we do before training is to take our training dataset and slice it into chunks of roughly equal size, having about the same number of observations in each chunk. Then we run our training and validation procedures k times, each time including different chunks into our training and validation datasets. We record the optimal results, loss and accuracy of each training session. We then average the results, and we now have the model's optimal performance figures for the given architecture. We then test the model against the test dataset, a dataset it still hadn't seen, and measure the test loss and accuracy as well. Lastly, as always, we choose to use the best performing model on the test dataset. Pseudo-randomness. Neural networks draw numbers from a random distribution and use it to manipulate input values and learn the true relationships between features and the target in the population. Randomness is used for shuffling out dataset observations, for weight initialization, for k-fold cross-validation, dropout, and more. However, while we need the ability to draw numbers at random, we need it to be drawn from the same random distribution, or else we will not have any replicable results. This is called pseudo-randomness. We need to be able to reach the exact same result when running the same model more than once on the same inputs. Therefore, a very important yet simple step in training a machine learning model is setting the program's random seed to a fixed number. In Python, this is done using inserting a line of code at the beginning of the script. Notice that NP stands for NumPy, the Python package for array calculations. Now let's discuss my network. The idea was to learn about data and machine learning hands-on. The goal was to gain an understanding and to build a base which afterwards I could choose whether I continue building it or do something else. It is a feed-forward neural network that utilizes around 275 features from the world of technical and fundamental analysis. I create these features using both financial data I draw straight from the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange's API and other data I get from other sources. Why this architecture? Because this is what I knew, and this is what I wanted to learn. Why 275 features? Because this is what I decided to create for my data as what seems to me to influence the stock's return. I could easily stretch it to 1,000 or 10,000 by using the same methods for different time spans or different specifications. These features can be anything from yesterday's price change, rarity of price change, industry, price relative to Bollinger Bands, average standard deviation, and also interest rate changes, and the Shiller price to earnings ratio. My assumption was, if traders that use 2 to 3 signals to trade are so smart, maybe I can be 100 times smarter with using machine learning. The mission was to predict tomorrow's price movements for the 125 largest companies in the Israeli stock market, but this can be done for any stock market as it's basically the same trading data everywhere. In reality, it doesn't work well and the network is currently unable to provide smart projections. There is much to do and try to tackle this mission from more angles. This is an experiment. It's a curious attempt to try to use data and see where we get. I only use Python's basic machine learning packages, NumPy and Pandas, in my network. The reason was to have full control and the best understanding on the underlying mechanisms of the network. This also means no use of GPU. Generally, the network is created using object-oriented programming. The network is an object, a layer is an object, our loss, accuracy, dropout, activation functions, and optimizer are all objects. While this is not the only way, it has many advantages. Is predicting stock returns even possible? Maybe it is, perhaps for smaller and more specific tasks. There are many difficulties in trying to predict stock returns. There is difficulty in obtaining enough important data that explains returns. The data is noisy, and there's a low signal-to-noise ratio in stock markets. High overfitting risk due to all the noise. Non-stationarity, meaning differing distribution statistics and perceptions through time. Multi-collinearity of features, since some are highly correlated with each other. Regularization can help with this. Dynamic markets, new players getting all the time, also interfere with the results. Also, black swan events and more. Well, I tried it anyway. Getting into machine learning without scientific education is not easy. While my high school math was enough for understanding what's going on with the network, it was very difficult for me to perceptualize the process in my mind, especially at the beginning and especially the backpropagation part. I clearly remember my first eureka moment when I switched from a single-dimensional thinking into a multidimensional thinking. Up until that point, for several months, I was sending into the network all my feature data as a single vector because that's what I knew and understood. Naturally, this didn't work well for datasets with more than one feature, and I didn't know how to make it work. One day at the beach, I was in the water watching the sunset, as I often did back then. And finally, the solution hit me. I made a leap in my perception and was able to make the network process matrices of data. These are the lines of code that make it work, taking my training sample and reshaping the data into the correct matrix form for the network to process. More discoveries followed, such as when I discovered how to perform backpropagation on hidden layers of different size, which gave my network a strong boost in efficacy. Now I was able to gradually decrease my network's hidden layer size as they near the output layer. Suddenly, I could make networks that look like this. So I played with different activation and loss functions and saw how each influences the network's performance. I tried dropout, various data transformation methods, and all kinds of values for my hyperparameters. It was a truly fascinating experiment. There's true joy in making such discoveries for yourself, even though they were long understood by practitioners. Now let's dig deeper into my network and discuss data preparation. I created a program that gathers trading data straight from the Tel Aviv stock exchange using its API. It then aggregates the data in large tables where the index labels are trading dates from January 1st, 2006, and the column labels are the security tickers. The program then creates about 275 features for each security every day, resulting in more large tables where this time the index labels are the tickers and the column labels are the features. Such table is created for every trading day for 755 currently and past traded companies in the stock exchange. Lastly, the program aggregates all these tables into one large table where the index labels are one day's data for one ticker and the column labels are features. This is our training dataset. What my experiment does is first it creates the training dataset from January 1st, 2006 to June 30th, 2022. The test dataset is created from the other half of 2022. Then we train, validate, and test our network, log the results, change the hyperparameters, and train again, letting it run for days and weeks nonstop. I train every network architecture, which I called super strategy, 10 times using 10 cross for cross-validation. I call each of one of these 10 iterations a sub-strategy. A super strategy's overall performance is the overall loss and accuracy of its sub-strategies. I never use a super strategy itself for prediction, only as a reference to its 10 sub-strategies. Even when predicting, I use the 10 sub-strategies and average their suggestions to make the final suggestion. After enough strategies with decent results have been created, I backtest them on new data as well, such as from July 1st, 2022. Backtesting is done through going back in time and utilizing our strategy for taking positions in each period. We go through the periods and see how our portfolio fared. A word of caution, we may be tempted to use the best backtesting performance strategy, but this will be wrong. Such simple backtesting is not a viable method for choosing strategies due to reasons discussed in Professor Marco Lopez de Prado's papers, The 10 Reasons Most Machine Learning Funds Fail, found in the FDP curriculum. This super strategy backtesting also gives me the backtesting results for the individual sub-strategies, since they are already used in the process of predicting tomorrow's price change. After we have enough strategies, we choose the best performing one based on loss and accuracy and use that to trade. It will not be bad to see it was successful in backtesting as well. Our daily predictions come as a table ranked from the highest price change prediction to the lowest for both long and short positions. The result, what we see here is the hyperparameter part of sub-strategy 169A. I have little less than 7,000 sub-strategies and super strategies trained and backtested. We can see the size of the datasets it uses for training, validation, and testing, the specific falls, the data transformation type, the dropout percent and layers, the number of neurons in each layer, the layer's activation function, in this case, Google's swish, with a linear function in the output layer. I use LeCun as the weight initialization technique and the ADAM, adaptive moment estimation, optimizer. You can also see some of the optimizer's hyperparameters and a regularization lambda, which sets the strength of a regularization penalty. Here we see the loss function I use, the mean squared error, and the proportions I chose for the training and validation datasets. We see that training stops at epoch number 6, which also had the lowest validation loss. We will use these epochs parameters when using the network. The rest of this table shows the training, validation, and test results. You can see that I tried something new, measuring directional accuracy, since if my network predicts a certain price movement and the actual movement was different, maybe sometimes it is actually a good outcome. So a weak directional accuracy is when the true price change was lower than the prediction in absolute terms and in the same direction. A strong directional accuracy is when the true price change was higher than the prediction in absolute terms and in the same direction. In other words, if the network anticipated a 3% change in the actual and the actual change was 5%, it was a good thing. This table continues, and in general, I document 161 of information bits on each strategy, including the backtesting results. For the training and validation results, I like to use the following chart composition that shows me from top left to bottom right the data loss, accuracy, layers mean weight, learning rate across steps, regularization penalty, and the layers mean bias. This one may have stopped learning too early, and we don't notice a rise in validation loss. For the test results, I like to use the following chart composition that shows me on the top row the test predictions and true target values in the original scales, and on the bottom, the model test, loss, and accuracy. Notice that having the network test prediction sit on a straight line, which happens to be the regression line, is suspicious. It's too perfect. Also notice the large bump in the test data loss after step 25. This is due to some erroneous data from the stock market, which was since fixed. This comes to show a quick visual perception of how this sub-strategy actually performed in testing. We could easily spot bad results when these charts are erratic. Understanding these results is an ongoing process. Here we see the backtesting results of strategy number 169 in both long and short strategies, and also the benchmark return in pink. Does this mean the network is better for short strategies and that we should start using it right away? The answer is no. Out of 7,000 strategies, some are bound to show spectacular results by random. And this is why we must log everything we do. So as you can see, more work is needed to optimize the network, perhaps simplify the task, gather more quality data, and make more experiments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. This was quite fascinating, and I really appreciate that you went through the whole process and provided really a very nice educational webinar for our audience, especially FDP charter holders. So there were a couple of questions, and a number of questions were asked, of course, ahead of time. But let me just mention the two that came up, and actually they were also part of the written questions submitted by audience. One was, are you using daily data, monthly, or did you try different sort of frequency with different successes? What are your thoughts and experience in that area?
My general thought is that the smaller the time span you go, the more random the movement is, and the longer it goes, the less random, but more data is needed to understand what's going on. And I decided to use daily data, but my program is 80% ready to use weekly data as well. I didn't think about monthly.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to monthly, then you have far fewer data sets, so it's going to be difficult to train the data. Yeah, that's the problem with finance. We have only one history, so it's not like physics that we can create our own data. The other question, which I thought was is interesting because it comes up all the time, in terms of the output, what is, you kind of alluded to that, direction versus the actual percentage, for example, prediction. So did you experiment with using different sort of objectives to predict, price, return over a longer period of time, and so on and so forth?
Great question, and not yet. I am planning to work in this field because I'm now trying to guess a continuous value. I think it will be easier to maybe try to think to guess the probability of having a movement larger or lower than 5% in absolute value. Maybe this should be easier.
Yeah. One sort of question or comment of my own. Generally, I mean, in academia, which is where I'm coming from, for testing and predicting, even not using machine learning, but the old-fashioned econometrics, portfolios tend to perform better. In other words, it's easier to predict portfolio returns. You can use the same sort of fundamental values and the features, but create portfolios. Did you experiment at all with sort of forecasting or working with portfolios and indices and so on, rather than individual stocks?
This is a great direction to take. And this is the idea, the main idea behind my startup. This is what I'm developing from a different angle. I did not try to pursue it under the network.
Yeah, that could be quite promising, I believe. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when you started this, one of the questions was submitted. Did you know anything about Python programming from your previous life, or did you have to learn everything on your own, more or less?
I learned everything on my own 4 years ago. It was 2019. I was 33. But I do have a very distant past in programming when I was a child. But I did all kinds of projects during this time. I was feeling much more secure about my programming. And then I just went into machine learning and learned that.
Now, I noticed that, and you mentioned it, that you basically used sort of the most basic packages of Python and didn't really try to use sort of specific software that are written for neural networks. Was it just because you wanted to learn everything yourself? What was the reason behind it?
Yes, I treat this network like a car you have in your garage, that you go and build something from scratch or play with something old. I wanted to know and learn the bits and bytes to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, do you think people who are getting started, would you recommend them to sort of follow your steps, or maybe for the sake of saving time, or just taking advantage of other people's knowledge, you go ahead and use, like TensorFlow, for example, which everyone uses? What's your suggestion there?
Depends on the character. If you like to explore and you have time and you don't, you're not afraid to, to put the time and you can say lost income when doing that, you should pursue it. You should do it if it fascinates you. If it fascinates you from another direction, from different levels, maybe using the other packages, TensorFlow, PyTorch, maybe this is enough.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like to sort of see exactly what's going on behind, because sometimes there are hidden sort of decisions made within the software that you're just not aware, and that could adversely affect your, at least on a smaller scale. It's good to do it on your own and then add to that. Yeah.
But there is a shortcut. Some people have really good perception in their mind, being able to perceptualize complex ideas. Maybe these people don't need to dig deep. Maybe they can get the same result by using these packages.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, a good question came up on the chat about using sort of ensemble methods, combining different models or different methods. Did you try that at all, or is this something you think may help in the future?
This for sure can help. I think the neural network itself is too flexible, too complex. If we can do anything to make the features easier for it, or make other tasks easier with some other machine learning models, then I think it can have great benefit with not a high cost.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah. And then tell us just a little bit about the features that you use. You use fundamental or mostly just past prices and moving averages? What were the sort of the fundamentals you used?
I have a lot of technical analysis inside this network, but I know that it shouldn't succeed according to the strong market efficiency theory.
Yeah.
There's no reason for this to succeed, and actually it didn't succeed, but it was the easiest for me to create as features. So I did that, and I added some foreign exchange data, some interest rates. I have some market cap data, even the deals made. I used the Shiller price to earnings ratio, all these kinds of things. To try to get as broad a picture as I can and apply elastic net regularization, and hopefully for something to happen. But so far, it didn't bring the results I wanted it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think one problem that I have experienced is that your input basically comes in different frequency, right? I mean, the fundamental data are quarterly or monthly, and then of course you have daily data, so that creates an issue. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, again, my own experience is that for certain asset classes, it works better than others. For example, when it comes to interest rates, for currencies and commodities, I've had good experience. But individual stocks, just like you, it's very difficult. There's just so much noise, and it's very difficult to do it on a consistent basis. Have you tried it on commodities and foreign currency, or just tried it only on individual stocks?
Well, I buy the data straight from the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. So
oh, I see. Okay.
Other data providers, I just focused on that, but I can easily, if I get the data from other places, I can easily use it for commodities or other types.
Yeah. Especially now that we have commodity ETFs, it's going to be fairly easy for you to use it. And I think you will be surprised that actually for commodity ETFs and currency ETFs, they all come from the exchange. It's probably already in your data set, maybe. At least from the US, you can get it. You'll probably get different results. It's at least surprised me when I tried it, and I got much better results from applying it to commodity ETFs and commodity exchange currencies rather than individual stocks or even indices of stocks. So there's just something about that segment that leads itself more to predictability. And it's not so surprising because you have CTAs who've been making a living for many, many years and showing decent performance. And they typically focus only on commodities and currencies and to some extent interest rates. So something for the audience to maybe think about.
This is interesting. I thought to focus on the Israeli market because it's not that deep. It doesn't have too much liquidity. And I thought to myself, maybe it's not efficient enough. Maybe there's something, some meat there. But I couldn't do it. But I did hear about various companies, especially around here, that are able to make decent income from predicting the main stock indices, Tel Aviv 35 or 125, from simple regression.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering whether being small and not that liquid is it really an advantage for sort of neural network, or maybe something far more efficient with far more transactions and more data like US would work better. So, we look forward to hearing from you if you apply them to other markets and other asset classes and other sort of strategies, and see what the experience is. And hopefully you can come back and share your results with us.
I will happily do it.
Yeah. Well, I know you had the questions that were submitted ahead of time. Is there anything you want to address, or you think you've taken care of them mostly?
I will try to answer, because maybe some people will ask themselves how much Python knowledge is needed. So you do need to have a decent amount. You need to be to feel secure with your programming capabilities. You need to know NumPy and Pandas and understand data. And let's just say that the better you feel with your coding skills, the better you will be able to implement your ideas. Another question was, what are some reliable and affordable sources of market data to build neural networks? The answer is straight from stock exchanges. You can buy it from there. Maybe some sell it, give it for free. They use APIs. You need to create your own API program to speak with their system. And then you can just get the data easily.
That's a great segue to our next webinar. As you can see here, we're going to have Didier, who has created this OpenBB. I highly recommend it to all the people who are listening. It's a free, open source way of getting data from many sources. And most of the data sources are free. A few of them you have to pay, but 90% of them are free, and it's amazing what you can get for free these days. So what this OpenBB does, it basically puts them all on one platform. So on one basically dashboard, you can get all the data, and also it provides some basic sort of analytics. But also they have an API that you can basically call from Python. So this is exactly perhaps what you were looking for. I will highly recommend talking to Didier or just going to his website, OpenBB, and look at the wealth of information that you can get access free of charge in a very user-friendly and a highly customizable platform. So anyway, we're going to have Didier and our FDP charter holder, Cornell, in next month. And I hope people who are listening to us will come and take a look at that, and maybe combining what they learned there and with what you provided, which was fascinating, they can develop their own trading strategies.
I think they should, because the market for alternative data, which is currently $4.4 billion, is projected to reach $120 billion by 2030. Yeah. So it's an annual growth of 50%. You should at least be familiar with this field.
Yeah. This OpenBB has both alternative and traditional one, stocks, options, futures, and so on. They have those as well. So it's a great resource. Well, thank you so much. Actually, your timing was perfect. You left enough time for Q&A, and I already received a few comments from the audience that they thought this was very useful. So thank you so much, and hope to see you again. And best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Hussein. Just a quick reminder that registration for our October exam cycle is still open, and we ask you to visit our webinar library for the recording of this presentation and any other following presentations. We appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us.